Have you ever travelled on the train and seen this wreck on the Laira? Have you ever wondered about its history? I have. This is the remains of the Antelope. She has been slowly rotting away since about 1952 or thereabouts. She was built by R. Jackman of Brixham in 1906. Her Brixham number was MB 128. She had several owners in her life as a fishing ketch. Trawling had been a means of catching fish since the mid-1800s. However, dragging a funnel-shaped net required a lot of power, and windless days were not conducive to trawling. She was bought and sold several times. One owner even bought her back after selling her. In 1936, Hunter Horizons Limited bought her and had a 40 horsepower motor fitted to her, giving her a top speed of 4.5 knots. She was bought and sold several times, but it seemed that her work as a fishing boat was over because her owners seemed not to be associated with fishing and lived inland. Finally, in December of 1946, Mr. David Edmund Harrison, a master mariner, bought her.
Perchance, an old friend of mine, Jenny, saw this video and got in touch with me. This is her story.
On leaving the pub, Mum and Dad moved to Hamble and lived aboard Antelope. I lived aboard Bullecourt and spent the summer holiday aboard Antelope, earning my keep in doing odd jobs, of which there were many. I caulked the leaky deck. It leaked everywhere, for she was quite old. Dave ordered sails, renewed the running rigging and overhauled the standing rigging. Dad overhauled the old engine and I made a bed for the generator. One job we did not do, which was vitally important, and I could never understand why Dave overlooked it, was that we didn't clean the hull in order to apply anti-fouling. When the old tub was considered to be ready, we moved slowly down the Hamble and out into the Solent and west towards the Needles and the English Channel. Aboard was the family and Frank's friend Ken Adams, also an engineer with the RASC fleet, one of the few qualified engineers. Most of us were lacking in credentials and had bluffed our way into the organisation. Ken had an easygoing personality and was soon a friend of the family. He had a Leica camera and took lots of pictures of the trip. He also gave Bunty her nickname, and Bunty she was ever afterwards. By the time we reached the western end of the Solent it was dark and I turned in. The owners ran the boat and apparently when we reached St. Catherine's Point drifted dangerously near land, and Dave was having ulcers, but cleared in time and we continued slowly west. We had a pretty good run across Lyme Bay, but as we reached the Devon coast, Dave realised that, because of the slow progress, we wouldn't arrive in Plymouth before our leave expired. So we decided to put into Brixham and dropped anchor in the outer harbour. Our stay in Brixham was rather protracted because we had to find time to get this slow tub down channel. We were puzzled why she was so slow on the engine and realised later it was sheer luck, because when we reached Mashford's yard at Kreml and berthed alongside, we were to find the cause of the trouble. As the tide left and she was high and dry, we had a peep under the hull, ostensibly to see why the propeller was fouled, only to find the hull was completely lagged with seaweed. It was a wonder she moved at all. She did not move again for years, and so ended the great adventure. Dave, Frank and I went to work every day via the ferry, while Dad worked on the boat as much as he was able, or inclined. Mum and Vera cleaned and cooked. Antelope had a ship's lavatory, the manual pumping type, because it used seawater, a wash basin with cold water pumped from the tank in the bilges, and hot water supplied by a coal stove. 4 double cabins, bunks in the forecastle, and a large day saloon. We saw some splendid yachts coming and going in the yard, and all the Cornish lifeboats came in turn for refit. I had a trip in the Plymouth boat once when she went out on trials. Time went on and Dad was living on capital and was concerned about his future. He and Bunty were 50 years old, and there were protracted discussions on what to do and where. He decided to buy a shop and sell fish, and I decided to join him in this project. I packed up my job with the RASC and we found a shop in the back streets of Plymouth, bought a van and fitted it out, and starry-eyed went into business. Pat was footing the bill. He engaged retired Brixham fishermen to teach us how to rig and repair a trawl. He bought an 18-metre fishing boat which had belonged to the Marine Biological Association in Plymouth, and later worked as a commercial trawler by Bill Nichols and his sons from the Barbican. She had an ancient Deutz engine, and he decided to replace it with a McLaren diesel. As I was to be the engineer, he asked me to go to Leeds where the engine was constructed and study the assembly, etc. In short, see how it ticked. I was booked into the Metropole Hotel and spent a lot of time at the McLaren works and watched the assembly from the first nut and bolt. On the first Sunday I decided to go to Whitby, but the coach firm was not running a trip there but was doing a run to Scarborough, so I settled for that with the thought that I would see some boats there anyway. I booked a seat and went to the waiting room. There were a few people there, including a girl wearing an ocelot coat and reading the news of the world. I thought, she can't be that bad if she's reading that. That was November the 7th, 1948. Our tickets were numbered, and when we boarded the Wallace Arnold coach we were seated next to each other. We chatted on the way and also on the return to Leeds, and agreed to meet during the week. Dorothy was doing her midwifery in Leeds. Yes, it was Dorothy. We met several times that week, and I extended my stay at the Metropole for another week in order to see her even more. Then I returned to help out in fitting up the trawls and preparing the engine room for the new motor. Dave decided to join the venture. During this fitting out period, Dorothy came down for a brief holiday, staying aboard Antelope, and had a very good opportunity to meet Mum and Vera and the rest of the gang. She and I had a lot to talk about, and we would walk to Barnpool or the path to Millbrook and Nellie Parsons Grove, which was reported to be haunted. One evening I popped the question and we were engaged. The next day we went to Roborough and had lunch at the George Hotel, and later walked the lanes nearby and admired the new ring we just bought in Plymouth. It was the 7th of February 1949. We fixed the date of the wedding for the following May, and Dorothy returned to Leeds and we fishermen went back to sea. We had a good return from our first trip, and subsequent trips gave us valuable experience and provided a sort of living. But we had to get outside the Eddystone Light and Rocks to catch any amount of fish. Pat Hall was the skipper, I was the engineer, and Dave was the cook. Pop was a general dog's body. Pops did not last long as a fisherman. He damaged his hand in the thorns of a ray, had a very nasty infection, and decided when he recovered it was not the life for him. He and Bunty returned to the pub life, taking a Plymouth brewery managed pub, the Fountain Hotel in Liscard. Dave and Vera came to us and had the flat upstairs, so Dorothy had some company when we were at sea. Gwen and Frank had been living on Antelope all this time and suggested we join them, which we did, and we stayed a year on Antelope. The Mashford brothers were very kind to us and went out of their way to make our stay pleasant, although we must have been a nuisance to them at times. At the same time, we did a good night watchman job for them, being at the quiet end of the yard, and we brought Leon Liddy to them for service and repairs. Pat Hall soon lost interest in fishing, for as the owner it was not very lucrative, particularly for one with little experience, so we returned to Plymouth and arranged that the previous owner and his sons would come aboard. Bill Nichols was a fisherman with vast experience and soon had us catching fish properly and making money. Bill and Dave did not hit it off and soon parted company. Dave and Vera moved to Liscard and took a little bungalow. Dave became barman at the Fountain Hotel. Vera and Dave had a privacy in their home for the first time in their married life, but it was not to last. Dave could not take the life of service, and he and Vera moved again to his hometown of Dorking, where he obtained employment with the Ordnance Survey, which was a natural for him as he was a master mariner. Vera by now was pregnant too. We were doing well at sea, for Nichols was a hard, experienced man, and when many boats put back to harbour because of bad weather, we carried on. Consequently, when we landed, our catch always made good money.
A 1954 TV documentary film, Brief Journey, marked the opening of the South West's first television transmitter in 1954. In the film, a train passes the Antelope on the Laira. She is complete but unmastered, and possibly abandon.